We have so much going on in our nation. We have individuals that are constantly involved in changing around the Bible, changing around religion to suit themselves. And we have a case in point tonight with a preacher in Carthage, Tennessee. Now, you know, you might wonder, why would we be doing a broadcast about someone as far away as Carthage, Tennessee? Carthage, Tennessee is in the Nashville general area. If you're way over here from us and you're not familiar with that area, you just basically say you're in the Nashville area. You can be to Carthage probably an hour and 15, 20 minutes, something like that. And you're driving down I-40. It's in that general area of the Cookville area, is not far from there. And it's an area that we're very familiar with. When I first went overseas in the 1990s, I spent about 4 months in and around that area, Smith County, White County, Putnam County, and one of the schools that operates there, the director of the school wrote 100 letters out and sent them to area congregations, churches of Christ in that area, and it gave me a foot in the door to go in to talk to them about missions. And so I left the United States and spent 5 years over in the Marshall Islands, and it was a very helpful for me to be in that area. Lots of churches of Christ, not nearly as many Baptists in those days as I remember it. I remember somebody, I went into a realtor's office to get my bearings to find out where some of these congregations was located. He had them all on, he was a Baptist, and he had all of these churches of Christ in yellow all throughout the county, and he had the very few Baptist churches in red. And so I don't know what that was about, but he really was focusing on those churches of Christ. And so tonight we're going to focus on the Baptist church in that area. We have a back and forth going on for about a year and a half with playing Ron Ralph's lessons. And one of the reasons that we're doing that is he's a very vocal individual in the independent fundamental Baptists. And tonight what I want to do is I want to use them as a means to show you what is happening inside of religion today. You know, it is amazing to me that everybody that comes with the Bible and says they're called to preach, their members think that they are in fact a man of God. And they think that I should not say anything about them because they are a man of God to them. Well, the question tonight that we're going to ask ourselves is, are they really a man of God to God? That's what ends up being the burning question tonight. When we start asking that question, it helps us to look at what the Bible says when you think about someone like me taking upon myself to say something about somebody who is claiming to be a preacher. But notice this is Paul's letter to Timothy. Now, I'm basically getting my instruction just like Timothy did in this particular instance. Paul says, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies in hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron." Now, is it wrong for me tonight to say that there are some individuals out there that have departed from the faith and they're actually speaking lies? They are hypocrites as well. And I just, I don't understand why it is wrong in some people's minds if you can demonstrate it. And tonight, that's exactly what we're going to do. And we're going to present information to show you that this is the kind of thing goes on. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, "This know also that in last days perilous times shall come. Men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection." Individuals in our realm, especially amongst the Baptist preachers, they're all the way always giving their testimony. And this gentleman, Ron Ralph, we're going to listen to him some tonight. He spends 20 or 30 minutes just boasting about himself. And that's exactly how we know that we're on the trail of someone that Paul describes in his writing. So tonight, that's one of the things we're going to do. We're going to examine, and it's not just going to be about this individual. We're going to be examining the doctrine that he is actually teaching. 2 Timothy 4 says, "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine." Now here's the question tonight. Will you endure sound doctrine? Or will you continue to take this man-made information that isn't even, it's not even a cousin to what the sound doctrine says. But after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and turn to fables. You know, this gentleman, Ron Ralph, is the consummate storyteller. Fables. People will listen to fables when they won't listen to the truth. And so tonight, this is the kind of information I want to start out with. I want to make sure that you have a chance to hear some of this. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to begin with a set of clips from this individual. Let me get my media player to a size that I think is going to be good and useful for us. I'm going to begin. Now, what I've done for some of his viewers that are listening, it just drives them, they just have a conniption fit when they hear that I edited the broadcast or the lesson that he preached. I don't have time tonight to run 25 minutes of Ron Ralph telling stories. And so I'm going to play some lengthy clips, but tonight I want you to be able to hear what I hear. Like, for instance, if I would play the first 10 minutes, by the time I got to 14 minutes where he contradicts himself, you would have forgotten what he said in his first few minutes in his speech. So what I've done is I've edited it. I have clipped the portion that he said about faith, and then when we get 14 minutes into it, when he contradicts himself, then I basically give that up to you, serve it up to you as it goes. Now, in their mind, this is going to be, this is just no way that this is the way that you should do it. You should listen to his whole sermon. Well, you can get online and hear his whole sermon. The sermon that we're looking at tonight is called We Walk by Faith. And all you have to do is type in Ron Ralph, R-A-L-P-H, Ron Ralph. Now, he wants you to hear it. He has it up on YouTube, unless it's like one that we pulled down last year and they took it off, just took it completely off the air. They ended up putting back in audio. I still have it in video. Sometime we'll play some more clips out of it because he just badgers and harangues everybody in the Southern Baptist Convention, which I'm fine with that. The only problem that I have with them is they whine when I get on and do the same thing that he did to the Baptist Convention. The difference between me and Ron Ralph is I prove it. He just made a lot of accusations against them and didn't prove anything, and we just simply played the accusation. So tonight, if you're a person and you're wondering why it is that you're different in, like say, Independent Fundamental Baptist, you might be wondering, well, why am I different? Why is it that we're different from these other denominations? Here's the answer. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to begin with a clip where he starts talking about what faith is, and he kind of introduces his lesson with something that isn't really about faith. But take a listen.
Actually, it takes faith to live for God, period. No matter what, it takes faith. I get tickled at the way people talk and the things they say. Your pastor said something about tithing earlier, and people say, well, tithing's in the Old Testament.
Is it impossible to understand it?
He was going pretty fast.
Yeah, I turned it down to a quarter.
Well, so is thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain. Actually, it takes faith to live for God, period. No matter what, it takes faith. I get tickled at the way people talk and the things they say. Your pastor said something about tithing earlier, and people say, well, tithing's in the Old Testament. Well, so is thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain. So is it okay to cuss? The only verse you've got is Old Testament. How about train up a child in the way he should go? Why do you quote that verse? That's Old Testament. All you're doing is looking for an alibi because of your wicked heart. That's what it boils down to. And not only that, tithing is in the New Testament. Look it up. Quit talking and start studying. It's in the New Testament. Now, I'm not going to get on all the verses about rightly dividing, and it's in Matthew and it's in Hebrews and all that stuff. I'm simply telling you, Jesus Christ showed up. Here's what he said. He said, you have heard that it have been said of old time. And he'd give the rule, and he said, but I say unto you, and in every case he raised the standard. We ought to be able to do more being saved, born again, washed in the blood, and got the Holy Spirit living in us than any Old Testament saint ever thought about doing.
Now, folks, that may not bother you, what he just did. It may not bother you at all, but he absolutely did not prove anything. He didn't demonstrate that you're supposed to tithe in the New Testament. He didn't show the manner in which giving is to be done in the New Testament, he just threw off on anybody who says that tithing is not a New Testament doctrine, and he labeled them as a person just looking for an alibi because they're wicked. So if I was listening to that lesson, now he started out by saying faith. You have to have faith to do anything, and he knew that some individuals would not take what he was going to say about tithing, and that's what this lesson is about. It's about giving to something called faith promise that they do, supposedly supporting missionaries, and he's wanting to be successful, so he just throws off on it. And he says, I know what you say, you just talk and you don't study. It's in the Bible. Well, there are a lot of things that are in the Bible. Wonder why he didn't bother to look at it to give you any information associated with it. Because at the end of the day, all you're going to have is Ron Ralph telling you what to do if you don't have the information associated with tithing. Now, maybe he didn't want to do that in his lesson. But if he didn't want to do that in his lesson, it's amazing to me how people just throw out things like, it's in the Bible. Well, let's just... there's several different ways that we can do that. Let me just go ahead and finish the clip. Now, 15 minutes over into it, I want you to listen to how he says what faith is not, okay? Now, what he did is he just said, you need to believe me, that tithing is in the New Testament, and you go back to the Old Testament. He knows it's in the Old Testament. That's why he threw out those two little situations. He said, you go all the way back to the Old Testament when you want to get on somebody about using God's name in vain. Why do you do that? And when you start talking about other things that you want to do, train up a child that you want to hear, train up a child in the way that he should go, you go back to the Old Testament for that. But some reason you don't want to go back to the Old Testament for tithing. Well, there are some principles in the Old Testament that are still valid, but that doesn't mean that we're using the information associated with that. We're not using that to teach New Testament doctrine. You have to find New Testament doctrine. There's New Testament about training children. There's New Testament about how we're supposed to arrange our house, things of that nature. So you see what he did? This is a common ploy. Now, I want you to listen to how he says that faith you should discard something somebody says without the proper tools or principles for faith.
So you're just kidding yourself with all that talk about Old Testament tithing and that kind of thing, but I'll leave that alone for now. I just want to encourage you. You've got a faith promise card. The Bible is abundantly clear that you and I need to learn to trust God's plan. Listen, here's what faith is. Faith is trusting God's plan. I'm going to go ahead and say this. I'm going to illustrate faith for you here in a little while. I'm going to talk about faith a lot tonight, but I just want to get this out there. Faith is not what most people think it is. People say, well, you just have to, they'll tell you some stupid story. I used this illustration Sunday. Suppose Brother Elliot told me tonight. Brother Ralph got up and ran this morning. Ran a mile in 2 minutes and 38 seconds.
Now, you might not have understood that just exactly the way he said it. He didn't say Brother Ralph ran the mile. He said he did. Brother Elliot got up this morning. He said, Brother Ralph, I ran a mile this morning.
How many of you believe he did that? I don't either. He comes up to me and says, ran a mile this morning, 2 minutes and 38 seconds. And I say, brother, I'm sorry, but that's faster than the record. I'm just having a hard time believing it. He said, well, you'll just have to take it by faith. Wrong.
Now, how do you like that? He says he got up and he told me a story that he ran a mile in 2 minutes and 38 seconds, whatever, 2 minute mile, 2 minute plus mile, barely, not a 3 minute mile. And he said, you beat the world record. And I just have a hard time believing that. And suppose that Pastor Elliott said, well, you're just going to have to take it on faith. You just have to take my word for it. No. Well, why is it at the beginning of this lesson, as he pulled out his faith promise card, which is basically something for you to fill in, tell him what you're going to pledge after he preaches, he tells you a stupid story, a stupid set of circumstances that is supposed to remove from your mind that the New Testament does not contain information that gives the authority, the direction, and instruction for you to be tithing today. This guy, he actually, in his church, he has them tithing, free will offerings, and then on one occasion he had a chest that he called the chest of Joash, and he had people giving above their tithes and offering and the free will offering. He had them giving above that, putting it in the chest that he went down to Goodwill or an antique store or whatever and got and drilled a hole in it and called it Joash's chest. Now, where in the world do you get these kinds of ideas? Well, I'll tell you where. It comes from the same stupid story that he tells that he made up in 15 minutes into his lesson. Now, let's go back again and let's listen to this, and you just you ask yourself, why did he say, I'm just going to leave that alone? And then he picked up the faith promise and he starts in on telling them how they ought to give. He just tries to dismiss what the Bible says. Now, this is not all we're going to do for sure. We've got a whole nother section where he's got this lesson is called, what did I say it was called? It is called We Walk by Faith. He has another lesson that we're going to compare, and it has to do with salvation. So we're going to take one practice that he is actually trying to bind on you, to sell to you, and he diminishes what some individuals have been telling his members, like me. I've been telling his members and different ones that tithing is not a New Testament doctrine. So he dismisses that, and then he comes along in the other lesson, Too Many Options by Pastor Ron Rao, and he tells how to be saved. And it's just unbelievable the things that people will buy. All right, take a listen one more time. Remember, he said that in his story, the pastor said he ran a 2-minute and 38-second mile. And he said, Pastor Ralph said, I just can't believe that. And he said, well, you're just going to have to take it on my word. You're going to have to take it on faith. No, wrong. That's just not going to get it. All right, why are we listening to this? Take a listen.
Actually, it takes faith to live for God, period. No matter what, it takes faith. I get tickled at the way people talk and the things they say. Your pastor said something about tithing earlier, and people say, well, tithing's in the Old Testament. Well, so is thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain. So is it okay to cuss? The only verse you've got is Old Testament.
That is not the only verse that you have about your speech. In Colossians 4, you have information about your speech. In Ephesians 5, you have information about your speech. That's the only verse you've got about not talking a certain way and actually being honest in your speech? No, that is not the case. Now, continue listening.
How about train up a child in the way he should go? Why do you quote that verse? That's Old Testament. All you're doing is looking for an alibi because of your wicked heart. That's what it boils down to. And not only that, tithing is in the New Testament. Look it up. Quit talking and start studying. It's in the New Testament. Now, I'm not good at getting on all the verses about rightly dividing, and it's in Matthew and it's in Hebrews and all.
Okay. Now, you might say, well, Johnny, you just said it's in Colossians and it's that train up a child is in the New Testament and speech is in the New Testament. I didn't say train the child was, but it's in Ephesians chapter 6, 1 through 4. He didn't give any passages. He said just in Matthew and in Hebrews. So let's just look. And I'll tell you what we'll do first. Let's do a search in the New Testament, just the New Testament, and we'll just see, to begin with, how many times tithing is in the New Testament. And I'm going to put in an asterisk so that we'll get everything. We'll get tithes, we'll get tithe singular, tithe plural. We'll get all of them in the New Testament. Now look at that. There's 7 times that tithes are mentioned in the New Testament. It really wouldn't have been that big of a deal for him, would it? I mean, he's going to tell stories about himself for 15 or 20 minutes. And he said, all y'all doing is talking and not studying. Well, he's going to tell stories in this lesson. I challenge you to get on and listen to We Walk by Faith. That's one of them. Then listen to Too Many Options. That's another one. And come back and tell me if he doesn't tell stories about himself 15, 20 minutes. And he doesn't bother to spend the time to get 7 verses so that you can see whether or not you have a wicked heart or not. You're just trying to find an alibi. No, what he's doing is he's the one who is trying to put you into bondage that he wants you to be in. And somehow or other, he thinks that the New Testament doctrine about giving is less than a tithe, less than 10%. I don't know where he got that. He's basically saying that we should do what the New Testament, what the Old Testament people did at least. Listen, when a person gives in the New Testament, they're giving as they've been prospered. When you give a 10% of what you have, that's not what you've been prospered necessarily. That's just a percentage. What if a person believes that they have been prospered and knows that they've been prospered above 90% of the people in the world? You think they're just going to want to give 10%? Just say, well, the Old Testament people, it was required 10% of them, and I'm blessed above all the people in the world. And that's how we are in the United States. 90%, 95% of the people in the world are way less than what we're bringing in, all the benefits that we have in the United States. And here's what I'm going to do. Well, the Old Testament is the standard, and they were told to give 10%, and I'm going to give 10% of all of the many, I could spend the rest of the hour saying many and not cover the wonderful blessings that we have in the United States. When it comes, just go to a foreign country sometimes and just see how blessed we are. Our roads, and people say, well, we pay taxes. Listen, your taxes are in no way comparable to the wonderful structure that we have, infrastructure here in the United States. Your electricity's always on unless you have some kind of horrible storm like Michael that came across, a typhoon, a hurricane, something of that nature. You've got electricity on all the time. You've got the best health care in the entire world. Wonderful roads. You get on the interstate and drive up and down the roads 70, 80, 85, as in Texas. You're driving down just a super highway doing 80, 85 miles an hour, getting where you want to go as fast as you know, one of the islands that I worked in the Pacific, it took us over an hour and a half just to drive 5 miles. And the whole time that you were driving, you're hitting potholes and you're wondering if the tide's going to come over. Some kind of coconut crabs all over the road. You just imagine if you were to break down what it would be like to be walking through those things. It'd just be like gigantic ants and beetles or something of that nature all over your feet. If you had flip-flops, Lori always wore flip-flops. I don't know what in the world she'd have done if we'd had a breakdown. Here we are, and we're just saying, well, he's saying you got a wicked heart because you don't want to give 10%. I don't know. They beat people to death. You heard, I told you a while ago that he says, not only does he say 10%, he says, and free will offerings, and then his Joash chest. So it's just amazing to me the things that individuals will put up. So here we are, Matthew 23. Now, you have to be reminded that people like Ron Ralph, they don't believe that the information that is taught to the Jews during the time of Christ and the time of the apostles Peter, James, and John, and the apostles that are with Jesus when Jesus was in his ministry, and the ones who were teaching on the day of Pentecost, they don't believe that you're actually under that particular gospel. They believe that once you get to Paul, then everything is according to Paul. So here's Matthew 23 that isn't even applying to Gentiles. It's just to Jews in their mind. And notice what Jesus said. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin and have omitted the weightier matters of the law. Judgment, mercy, faith. These ought you have done, and not to leave the other undone. Is that a command for you to tithe? Jesus lived under the law. Are you aware of the fact that Jesus actually lived under the law? Jesus was an individual who lived and died under the law. But when the fullness of time, Galatians 4:4, when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law. Jesus lived under the law. He was an individual who was not under his own covenant. Jesus instituted the new covenant. Jesus lived under the law of Moses, and he was walking in the midst of people who were also under the law of Moses. So here you are, he's talking to scribes and Pharisees, he's talking to the Jewish people, and is he telling New Testament Christians to tithe? No. He's talking to these individuals about their practices and how they omit weightier matters of the law, such as justice and mercy and faith, and he says, these ought you to have done, and not leave the other undone. Is that a command for you to tithe? Is that instruction on how to tithe? How are you going to figure out who you're supposed to give your tithe to from that verse? Well, look here. Here's Luke chapter 11. Same passage. It's Luke's account. But woe unto you Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and all manner of herbs and Passover judgment, the love of God. These ought you to have done, and not to leave the other undone. You know, really, if he's going to use this passage, he ought to have them tithing everything. They ought to get in their spice closet, and they ought to go through all of those things and take out 10%. That would be the instruction that you're seeing right here if they're doing what they're doing. Now, Luke 18. The Pharisee in Luke 18, persons generally know this because they get mixed up about the publican and the Pharisee that went into the temple to pray. And the Pharisee said, I give tithes of all I possess. I fast twice in the week. I give tithes of all I possess. So is Ron Ralph commanding that everybody fast twice a week? If he's going to use this verse and say this is binding because it's in the New Testament, do you realize all the stuff is in the New Testament? The Passover's in the New Testament. The Pentecost is in the New Testament. Does he do those too? Is he commanding his church over there? You see how these preachers will do you? If you're going to use these passages and say they're binding, then what about all the other things binding? Now, when we do get down to Hebrews chapter 7, where he said it's in Matthew and in Hebrews. Well, I'm giving it to you where it is. Hebrews chapter 7. Let's notice this. Let's back up a little bit and get a little bit of the context so that we can make sure that we didn't have somebody pull the wool over our eyes here in Matthew chapter 7. Notice this. We're talking about Melchizedek. He's been talking about Melchizedek in chapter 5. He says they're too dull of hearing. In other words, they don't really know their own scriptures. And then he moves on and comes back to it in chapter 7. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings, and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all. First being by interpretation king of righteousness, and after that king of Salem, which is king of peace, without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually. Now consider how great this man was, unto whom even the patriarch Abraham gave the tenth of the spoils. Now notice this. And verily they that are of the sons of Levi, who receive the office of priesthood, have a commandment to take tithes of the people according to the law, that is, of their brethren, though they come out of the loins of Abraham. There's your information in Hebrews about tithing. Now, in the instruction here, if he's going to go back to it, he said, now, when you talk about taking the name of God in vain, you go back to the Old Testament for that. And he said, if you're not going to tithe, I guess you can cuss. Well, okay, let's just say we're going to go back to the law. If we go back to the law, which he says we're not under, the Mosaic law says that the sons of Levi receive the office of priesthood, have a commandment to take tithes of the people according to the law. Of their brethren, that is of their brethren. So I'm assuming then, if we're using this passage, that Ron Ralph is a person of the Levitical lineage. He's of the tribe of Levi. And so all of his brethren, he's taking tithes of them because he's serving in the office of a priesthood, and he's from the tribe of Levi. I mean, seriously, it's no wonder he didn't want you to go and see this in Hebrews chapter 7. Because if he did, he would have to spend his entire rest of his lesson trying to finagle and wiggle it around, twist it around so that you could believe that he has the office of priesthood and a pastor at the same time, that he's of the tribe of Levi, and you're supposed to give him, he's supposed to take all of you who are his brethren, he's supposed to take tithes from you. And it's all according to the law of Moses. Is that really the way things work? Now, folks, I'm just saying, he told a stupid story. It was just a few minutes long, and he told that individuals who don't want to tithe have a wicked heart. And what I will say to you is that every time I get on one of his lessons, that's all he's talking about is giving. If it's not on finances, it's on faith promise. And he's talking about how much they give and trying to get other people to give. If tithing works so well, why are you having to worry these people all the time about giving? If you're a person who's a member of the Church of Christ, you don't have to go through that. We basically present to you what the Bible says about giving, about New Testament giving, and you have faith in that. Look at this. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do you. This isn't from the law of Moses. This is from the mouth of Paul. I would think that Ron Ralph would actually use this passage because they say Paul is everything. Paul, from the mouth of Paul, is saying, listen, as I've instructed the others, the churches in Galatia, here's what you need to do. On the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when you come. As God has prospered you. No, Ron Ralph says that Jesus wants you to give a tenth of your possessions or your net or your gross, however they're going to put it. And I guarantee you they're going to put it some way like that. You're not going to get away with just being willy-nilly about, well, what is your prosperity? They want to know what your prosperity. I've seen many a pledge card in these denominations where the pastor is trying to get out of them what they make. Nobody ever asked the pastor what he makes. And if you're going to go into the Old Testament, you might as well go in there. Everybody, Levites had to tithe too. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. Why isn't Ron Ralph telling everybody what he makes so that we can make sure that he's giving? Maybe he's got a wicked heart. So, and you know, for all I know, he is giving a tenth, but he's doing it wrong. That's not what the New Testament commands. It's as you prosper. All right, now, do I have to have Ron Ralph breathing on me to know how much I've prospered? Well, let's just get some more information because, yes, there is more information about it. Some individuals have never seen this before, but look at this. In 2 Corinthians 9, they're talking about it again. In chapter 8, they're talking about it. Chapter 9, they're talking about it. In 1 Corinthians 16, they're talking about it. But this I say, he that soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. You see these generalized terms? You know if you have bounty, you know when you're sowing sparingly. You think a person doesn't have enough sense to know that if they're planting corn and they only plant 4 or 5 pieces of corn, that they're not going to get a very good crop? See, this is a New Testament isn't all about laws like the Old Testament where it specifies. And see, once you've given your tithe, you've given. But in the New Testament, it's like this. Every man, verse 7, according as he purposeth in his heart. No, Ron Ralph's going to tell you got to give a tenth, and if you don't, you got a wicked heart. As you purpose in your heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity. God loveth a cheerful giver. Now look at this. Here's your passage to help you to see if a 10% is bound on you, you absolutely have to give 10%. You're now in a position where it's a necessity. You won't be faithful if you don't give 10%. Listen, folks, individuals in the true New Testament church, they give well beyond. Now, some individuals, they're in a position where they're on a fixed income. They have difficulty getting by just on their everyday life. But then you have other individuals they have all kinds of blessings at their disposal. And you might say, well, that's not in here. Yes, it is. If you drop on down in verse 14, notice how the Apostle Paul puts all of this together. In, let's see, hold on just a minute. Let me look at this just a second. I'm going to look at chapter, I know I'm looking right at it. Sometimes I have to look at things in my Bible to be able to see. In 2 Corinthians 8, he had just said it in 2 Corinthians 8, verse 14. Look at this. But we're talking about the same giving. He's talking about one chapter. He talks about the folk in Macedonia, how that he boasted to the people in Macedonia about the people in Corinth, and then he turns around and says the other way around. And while he was talking in 2 Corinthians 8, he says, but by an equality, now at this time your abundance may be a supply for their want, that their abundance may also be a supply for your want, that there may be equality. There's times when some individuals are having a difficult time. At the same time, there's going to be the other individuals will be having an abundance. Those people that have an abundance, they will well make up for the individuals who are having a difficult time. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's saying the folk in Jerusalem, in Judea, are having a difficult time. I'm not trying to make things harder on you to make it easy on them. I'm trying to bring about equality. And so individuals in the Lord's church, many times, many of them give well and above 10%. And here's the thing about Ron Ralph. Ron Ralph has them give this free will offering, according if you've been prospered, and then he binds a tithe on you. And then he comes up with this Joash. He said the Lord laid it on his heart to preach about Joash's chest. No, wait just a minute. He says in this stupid story that he makes up about Pastor Elliott comes along and says, I ran a 2 minute and 38 second, 35-second mile. And Ron Ralph says, I don't know. That's better than the world record. And he said, well, I did it. You're just going to have to take it on faith. I don't believe that God laid Joash's chest on Ron Ralph's heart. How do you get these, how is it that these pastors get you to the point where you just believe their stupid stories? Talking about God laid it on my heart that Joash had a chest, and I decided that we were going to have a chest. Or he didn't say he decided. He said God laid it on my heart to have Joash's chest. So I went down and got a chest and drilled a hole in it, and people started giving in it. And that's how we built our building. Why do y'all believe that? Not a bit of proof in it. Now, you might say, well, Johnny, this is not really that important. Listen, this is important to them. It's about giving. This is what they harp on all the time. If you're going to listen to Cornerstone Baptist Church, Ron Ralph, you're going to hear about giving. It is constant, just a barrage about giving. I don't know if they just don't have enough money over there. I don't know what the problem is. Now, when you hear my program, never ask for money. Don't talk about money on here. Don't ask you for a love gift. We have everything we do in the Lord's church, we pay for it in front. We're basically presenting this information to you free. We're wanting you to have a chance to be saved. We don't want you to pay for our broadcast. Give us money to put up our tents and do evangelistic efforts and things of that nature. Ron Ralph said in one of these sermons that I was listening to, he takes money from the Catholics to build his building, takes money. He said, call up your rich Catholic friends and get them to give some money so we can build our building. See? They don't care how they get their money. Now, you might say, well, this is not all that important. Well, I'll tell you what. Here's something that is extremely important, and that is the salvation of your soul. Now, if a fellow will tell you a stupid story, tell you a lie, twist the scriptures around, getting you to think that you're supposed to tithe and give free will offerings, and you're supposed to put money in Joash's chest, I don't really think you can trust him with your soul. I wouldn't trust him with my pocketbook. All that twisting around and making up stuff and then telling me I'm wicked because I don't give a tenth. Thank you very much. I have never given a tenth. That's exactly right. A tenth is not good enough for the blessings that God has bestowed upon me. And I have lived in a foreign country. I know what a blessing it is to live in the United States. It's a wonderful blessing. Now, don't tell me I have a wicked heart. I don't have to be beat all the time over the head with these verses about giving and all this faith promise stuff. And I'll tell you this, I know that Ron Ralph has heard about us, and we didn't ask anybody to help us with our broadcast to get the message all the way out into Carthage, Tennessee. Now, I don't remember how we ended up hearing about Ron Ralph. I do too. I can't believe that that's how it happened. I heard of Ron Ralph because of giving, because of the stuff that he says over there in his area. We have friends that are in that area, and they were telling us about Ron Ralph and all the stuff that is said and he says and what is going on over there about their giving and his preaching on giving and all that. That's exactly how I heard of him. Now, he's heard of us on another, like totally different. Our information goes far and wide, and we never had to ask a Catholic once for anything to get our broadcasts all over the world. And so let's look at what Ron Ralph would say to you about your soul. Now, that lesson was we walk by faith. Now I'm going to move to a lesson called Too Many Options. And I'm going to play a good portion of it in regard to his being saved. Now, let me gear this up just right quick.
God knows your heart. I just told him what he already knew. I got honest with God, and I got so honest with God that he decided finally to deal with me. I took off the mask. I admitted that I was in terrible shape and in need. He put a preacher in my life, and that preacher began to talk to me on a Friday night at midnight. I said, I've got some questions for you.
Now, I just can't help but prep you. I want you to listen to the kind of questions that Ron Ralph has for this preacher. And Ron Ralph's an individual that doesn't know any Bible. He doesn't have a clue what the Bible says. He's just been bouncing around in all these different churches, Church of God, Church of Christ, Pentecostal Church, Baptist Church. He's going with a girl now that's in the Baptist Church, and he gets her pastor to tell him, and listen to what he says.
He said, fire away. We started talking at midnight, and I said, I want to know something. Why does that one church say you got to get baptized and that other church says you don't? Why does that one church speak in tongues and that other church doesn't? And why does that one church have a pen and the other church says you can't have any music in the church? Why does that one church take them all the way under the water and that other church says you sprinkle them on top of the head? Why does that one church say you can lose your salvation and that other church doesn't? So I asked him those questions, and he answered my questions best he could for 5 hours. We got through at 5 o'clock in the morning. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, he had done the best he could, which was not that great, to be honest.
Okay, he's telling you that he asked his pastor all these questions for 5 hours. He did the best he could, wasn't even very good. And then, here comes the story.
But I'm sitting with an open Bible in my lap, looking at Matthew 11:28, where Jesus said, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And the words of Matthew 11:28 were about 10 times bigger than I'd ever seen them before. And I got on my face realizing it didn't matter what the Methodist or the Baptist or the Presbyterian or the Church of God or the Church of Christ said. All that mattered is what Jesus said. And I got on my face and I said, Lord, I can't handle it anymore. I'm miserable. I want you to save me right now. And I've been saved ever since. And I really believe I got called to preach at this. Before, and I got on my face realizing it didn't matter what the Methodist or the Baptist or the Presbyterian or the Church of God or the Church of Christ said. All that mattered is what Jesus said. And I got on my face and I said, Lord, I can't handle it anymore. I'm miserable. I want you to save me right now. And I've been saved ever since.
Been saved ever since. You're on What's the Bible Say?
Yes, John, it sounds like he needs to study 1 Corinthians 12:8.
Well, he needs to do something because he's already said that he doesn't go to Matthew, Mark, and Luke or the first part of Acts to get his salvation information. And here he is telling people that he went to Matthew 11 to be saved. So it's pretty amazing. You're not going to believe the rest of it. I guarantee you're not going to believe the rest of it.
Appreciate your program.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Now here you go. Let's just give you a moment here. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. Bigger than it had ever been. Let's make it as big as we can tonight on our program. It's as large as the fonts will go. Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Now, I want you to realize where Jesus is. Jesus is in the area, in and around where he grew up. He's talking to the people in Capernaum. He's saying to these individuals, it's going to be better for Sodom and Gomorrah than it is going to be for you on the judgment day. It's going to be more tolerable. Why? Chorazin, woe unto you, Bethsaida, for if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented a long time ago in sackcloth and ashes. Jesus is in the area of Galilee. He's talking to the Jewish people that are his relatives in that area. This is his home area. He's done most of his mighty works in this area, and they haven't responded. And he ends this particular section. Jesus said, I thank thee, O Father of heaven and earth, because thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, hast revealed them to babes. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in thy sight. All things are delivered unto me of my Father, and no man knoweth the Son, but the Father neither knoweth any. The Father save the Son, and whomsoever the Son will reveal him. Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Now, this is an area that's in the shadow of death, is how it's described when the prophecies about Jesus preaching came out in the early chapters of Matthew and Luke. Jesus is in this area. It's the area of darkness. It's a place where they are having an extremely difficult time. This is the area where wars are constantly fought, and individuals are changing hands at different times, and it's a very difficult area. But it's the Jewish people he's talking to, and he says, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that that does reference us. I am involved here as far as who Jesus has in mind, but this is not how to be saved. This is the extent of the invitation, and it's the way that the information is going to be imbibed by us. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I'm meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest in your soul, unto your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Who's he talking to? Well, the next chapter, look what he does. He starts right in, and he starts talking about the Sabbath day. Ron Ralph keeping the Sabbath day? At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn. His disciples were hungry and began to pluck the ears of the corn and to eat. Well, the Sabbath day is in the New Testament. Remember how he talked about tithes? It's in the New Testament. The Sabbath day is in the New Testament. You keeping the Sabbath day? You're not working on the Sabbath day? See, this isn't a passage that is a salvation passage in the sense that it gives you information as to how to be saved. Sure, you have to come to Jesus. But the question is how? How do you come unto him, all you that labor and are heavy laden? Is this a passage that Ron Ralph would go to in order to tell you how to be saved? No, he would take you somewhere where Paul is preaching. That's what he says. Now, that's not all of it. And we're not by any means done with what he said. Now listen. Now, he's telling you that's how he was saved. Nobody's saved ever since. That's just a story that Ron Ralph told you. He said, I don't care what the Church of Christ says. I don't care what these all say. Well, here's the thing. Why didn't you question this Baptist preacher if this is what he told you to do to be saved? And here's one of the reasons. Let me just do this for you right quick. Here's the problem, one of the big problems I have with this. He's listening to a Baptist preacher, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have the exact phrase, Baptist church, in the New Testament. There it is, 0, not one single time. This is a pastor in the Baptist church that's talking to him. He said, I don't care what the Church of God says. I don't care what this is saying. I don't care what the Church of Christ says. And he was saved with Matthew 11:28. Well, guess what? I wouldn't be listening to a Baptist preacher about how to be saved anyway, because he's in a church that's not even in the New Testament. And even Ron Ralph, when he starts teaching on tithes, which is not a commandment authorized for you to be put on you in the New Testament, he ended up saying, it's in the New Testament. See, you ought to tithe because it's in the New Testament. Guess what? Baptist church is not even in the New Testament, nor the Bible as a whole. The only place you can find it is in encyclopedia or one of their manuals. And yet he's saying that's what he took to be saved, and he wants you to listen to him. Now, wasn't that enlightening? Now listen to this. Listen to this.
Called to preach at the same time.
He really believes he got called to preach at the same time. Now, when the stupid story illustration with Pastor Elliott says, Brother Ralph, I got up and ran a mile in 2 minutes and 35 seconds. I don't know about that. That's more than the record. Well, I did it. But you're just going to have to take it on faith. You're just going to have to take my word on it. No, not going to do it. Listen, I'm not taking his word on it. Why do y'all take their word that they're called to preach? That's just a stupid story. And this one gets so stupid. I'm saying it is so stupid. It is unbelievable. The things that he sells to these people, and they take it. Listen to this.
I got saved, called to preach, started pastoring, got married, and went to college all in 1 year. That's the truth.
That's the truth. I ran a mile in 2 minutes and 35 seconds. Well, you know, I'm going to have a little bit of proof. No, you don't have to take it on faith. It's the truth. I got saved, I got called to preach, a pastor, and got married all in 1 year. It's the truth. Oh, really? Sounded like some stupid story that you made up, trying to sell to individuals who don't read the Bible. Remember how he started out when he was talking about tithing? That somebody said, I done heard y'all say the tithe is not in the Bible. You don't have to tithe. That's just silly things that people say. And what you need to do is study the Bible and stop talking, study. And he didn't show you a single thing about tithing, and you're still doing it. And here he is saying, well, this is the truth. No, where is this in the truth? None of this jives with the truth. Now, what I could do this evening is I could go where he says to be saved. Now, this is what he says. He says that the place to be saved is after Acts 13. Paul comes on the scene, and Paul starts preaching in Acts chapter 13. And this is when basically the Gentiles start being saved. Well, for some reason, they seem to be mixed up about Acts chapter 10 and 11, where Peter, one of the individuals they say that doesn't have the gospel to the Gentiles, preached to the first Gentile. And even when he talked about preaching to the first Gentile, he said that God made the choice that through his mouth the Gentile should be heard. Acts chapter 15, verse 5, 6, 7. By Peter's mouth, the Gentiles should hear the gospel. So anyway, if you were to go over here and you were to hear Paul preaching in Acts chapter 13 forward, how would you find individuals being saved? Nobody is going to be saved the way he told that he was saved. It's just a stupid story that he made up. It gets better. Listen to this.
And within 6 months, I felt like God called me to preach. I went up to my pastor and I said, I believe God's calling me to preach. He said, great, you're preaching Sunday. I don't recommend that. I couldn't quote John 3:16. I couldn't find John 3:16.
Fantastic.
I'm not exact. This is
fantastic. He tells the pastor, I think I'm called to preach. Good, you're preaching Sunday night. He said, I didn't know. Let's make sure that we get his story. I want his stupid story to be heard.
Baptist or the Presbyterian or the Church of God or the team. I'm not exact. This is not funny. Y'all are laughing. This is not funny. So I went to preach that Sunday night here. That's the truth. Where Jesus said, I couldn't quote John 3:16. I couldn't find John 3:16.
He's preaching. The pastor believed his stupid story that he's called to preach. He couldn't quote John 3:16. He couldn't find John 3:16. Listen, y'all, this is an indictment right here. Are you listening to this? This is the way Baptists are. He's admitting it. Big Ron Ralph, well-known, used all over. He said he's preached this lesson down in Texas. He's preached it in New York. He's preached it in the West Coast area. He's been all over preaching this lesson. And here's his story. This is the story that he tells, and it's the truth. He got up to preach. He couldn't quote John 3:16. He couldn't find John 3:16. You think it doesn't get any better? Oh, it gets better. In the sense of stupidity that I'm trying to show you the way these folk are. And we got people from over here in his church that's calling us up all the time, talking about coming over here and being on television and going to show us up. How could you show us up when you got this going on? The guy that you're propping up over here is telling you stories about his salvation, that nobody was saved this way. He doesn't even preach that you're saved this way himself. When he starts using Paul as an example, that's not the way Paul was saved. Paul wasn't preaching to Jews and telling them to be saved like Peter and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were. And so he didn't be saved this way. Not only that, he tells you that he was called to preach as soon as he was saved. He told the pastor he was called to preach, and the pastor put him up in the pulpit, and he couldn't quote John 3:16, nor could he find John 3:16. Now get this.
I'm not exact. This is not funny. Y'all are laughing. This is not funny. So I went to preach that Sunday night, and 2 people got saved.
How in the world can you have 2 people be saved, and the preacher supposedly that's been called to preach, he believes he's been called to preach, can't quote John 3:16 nor find John 3:16? What in the world did he preach? Did he get up and tell that stupid story that he just told in this particular instance and said, it's the truth? Well, you know what? I kind of doubt that. Well, you're just going to have to take it on my word. No, he said that's not how it works. And that's not how this works. This is not how to be saved. Now just think about this. I hope you keyed in on this. Think about the guy that says that he was saved, or the 2 people that were saved. So you've got these 2 people that Ron Ralph says was saved when he was preaching his first sermon, and he didn't even know how to quote John 3:16. He didn't know how to find John 3:16. And then 2 people were saved. Now, how much credibility would you put on those people really being saved? I mean, what do you have to know to be saved? Apparently nothing. You don't have to know anything, because Ron Ralph admits he didn't know anything. And you can actually just go ahead and mark it down. You got pastors running around in the Baptist church don't know anything, and they get up and preach, and then people buy into that nothing that they're preaching, and they think they're saved. Now, here's my question. What if I were to run into those 2 individuals that was saved that night, or that night when Ron Ralph, who couldn't find John 3:16, couldn't quote John 3:16, preached his stupid story, probably told his testimony. That's what he does in every one of these sermons. And then they were saying, what if I were to start talking to them about their salvation? And start questioning, oh, I know I'm saved. Well, how? Well, Ron Ralph was preaching, and Matthew 11:28 was bigger than it ever was. And Jesus said, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden. And I was saved, been saved ever since. Just a story, just as dumb. Here's the thing, I cannot understand why people can't see this. I mean, you just think about this. Your pastor just told that he was saved and called to preach on the same night. He's basically 18 years old, doesn't know nothing about the Bible, hadn't been involved with any kind of teaching, except he's been bouncing around all these other churches and don't know anything. Ask the pastor why some of these people say you have to be baptized and go under the water. Some say you don't, say you can sprinkle. Some say that you're always saved. Once saved, always saved. Others say you speak in tongues, some say you don't. He didn't know nothing. And then he turned right around and said the Baptist preacher didn't do a very good job of explaining it. I believe that. Most of these Baptist preachers that we run into, they'll call the police if you start asking them questions. They want to fight. As soon as you start showing their ignorance, next thing they want to do is want to get in a fist fight with you. So I believe every word of that the guy didn't do a very good job. So basically that tells me that Ron Ralph came out of that not knowing very much. And I can prove that because he ended up thinking all he has to do is just believe that Jesus said, come to me all you that labor and are heavy laden, and he was saved. And then he had the terrible sense, the idea that he could just get up and preach without even knowing anything about the Bible. And 2 people were saved. What in the world must they have thought they were doing in order to be saved? And I come into contact with people like this all the time who listen to these pastors who don't know anything. And when we listen to them, we catch all kinds of silly stuff that they're saying. Got you doing all kinds of stuff that's not in the New Testament. And you think you're doing what the Bible says, what God wants you to do, and really all you're doing is you're just following this guy that's a blind leading the blind. I'm saying really and truly now. Who can refute? Our telephone lines are open. You see the difference between us? Now, I've got him in this particular lesson at 21 minutes and 30 seconds. I'll just go there right quick.
How long do you normally preach? And I said, till I get done. And he said, well, we're on the radio and the program's only 30 minutes. And I said, well, maybe they'll get half of it. I was on live radio for 3.5 years in Carthage, Tennessee. Live, Brother Howard. And then...
Wow, he was on live television for 3 years. Live, Brother Howard? I was on TV live for 3 years. We're on TV live right now, Ron Ralph. Been on TV for 20 years live. Phone lines open, nobody filtering the calls. And we're basically saying this is the kind of ridiculous stuff that y'all are listening to. And your confidence, I'm talking about this is... I've met people that I think Jim Jones would love to have them in his church because they all drink the same Kool-Aid. They don't know anything. They're kind of like concrete. They're all mixed up and firmly set. Can't do anything with them. Why? Because I heard a young guy, 18 years old, preach, and he told us how to be saved, and I've been saved ever since. What's his name? Ron Ralph? You talking about that guy that didn't know up from down, admitted himself that he didn't know, couldn't quote John 3:16 and didn't even know how to find it in the Bible, and just was saved according to Matthew 11:28 just that same week? You talking about that guy told you how to be saved? I wouldn't trust that guy to lead me out of town, much less to lead me to heaven. What in the world? Oh, you talking about Ron Ralph. You talking about my pastor. Your pastor is admitting to the whole world how ridiculous he is, and y'all buying into it. Make him prove that he was called to preach. You say, well, how can you prove somebody's called to preach? Listen, y'all, let's see here. Fixing to run out of time. I'm just going to leave that. Next time I talk to you, that's exactly what I'll do. Is I'm going to demonstrate, and you look it up for yourself. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, 1-4, Paul said, I didn't come in here with just a bunch of words and flattery and men's wisdom. I demonstrated with miracles. That's what he did. Ron Ralph's not called to preach, and neither is your pastor. But what you're doing tonight is you're listening to what does the Bible say. And if you want to get in touch with me, 276-806-2150. That phone line is always on. I can give you information on what the Bible says so that you'll know for sure that you've been saved the way the Bible says. God bless you. Good night.